So let me begin with climate change is real. Humans are contributing to it. It is a threat to our very existence, and we are not doing enough to prevent it. That is what the evidence tells us, and I believe the evidence. But that's pretty much all that the makers of Don't Look Up and I agree on. Hi friends, it's Sarah. And before I get into the weeds, let me just say that if you enjoyed this film, that's fine. I'm not going to try and argue you out of that. A number of people whom I respect quite a lot enjoyed this movie. And I heard them out, and I hope that you will hear me out likewise. Enjoying a movie doesn't make it good, though. I've enjoyed plenty of movies that, as films weren't great. I mean, Insurrection is one of my favorite Star Trek films, and as a film, it's kind of weak, but I enjoy it. And yes, the question of what makes a movie good is subjective. It always is with art. But even within that subjectivity, there are standards and methods by which we do judge art and in which we do judge film. For example, we can look at how well the narrative is structured, we can look at the plot, we can look at the various character arcs, and that, judging it as a story, we can judge on whether the filmmaking techniques add to what they're trying to do or not, or how skillfully those techniques are used. We can look simply at how well the filmmakers achieve what they set out to do. And in the case of Don't Look Up, there's been quite a bit of work looking at some of those elements of criticism. In particular, I would encourage you to see a video by Vera Wild of Council of Geeks. She looks at not only the film, but the discourse around the film. Now, I don't want to repeat what others have done, so I'm going to be specific here. Since the filmmakers have billed this film as a satire of the reaction to climate change, the inaction on climate change, I'm going to look at why I think that satire doesn't work very well, and why I don't think it's a useful or productive addition to the discourse. This film has something that it wants to say. It has a thesis. People are not acting on climate change. Okay, good, we agree. Why? Why aren't people acting on climate change? It's not enough to simply say that they aren't. We should be asking the question, why? And satire offers a good chance to look at why. So let's look at how the film answers that question. And it has a lot of targets, but let's focus on the main four: politicians, capitalists, the media, the public. In this film, the metaphor for climate change is a huge planet-killing comet that is headed straight for Earth. It's not a great metaphor, as comets are an act of nature, and climate change does appear to be largely an act of us. The main protagonists of this film are two scientists, who are played by Leonardo DiCaprio and Jennifer Lawrence. And as soon as they have discovered the comet, they are brought to the White House to brief the president. Probably not what happened in real life, but, artistic licenses and just efficient storytelling. And the president they meet is an incompetent buffoon. Sadly, that's not as big a stretch of the imagination as it once was. However, what is a bit of a stretch of the imagination is that this incompetent buffoon is a woman. It's Meryl Streep doing a sort of gender-flipped Donald Trump with the crudeness and incompetence and nepotism and all of that intact, but simply a woman in that position. Now, I'm not a fan of cringe comedy often, so I was never going to like this, but also, as someone who studies gender studies, I feel this shows a lack of understanding of gender politics. Generally, to be in positions of power, women have to at least appear supremely competent. Even if that is not the reality, they do at least appear supremely competent. So I found, as I said, this would work in an absurdist skit to satirize the fact that women don't have this role, but here it takes away from the center satire. Anyway, this is who they meet. They're accompanied, these scientists, by a man from NASA who gives the president a file with a simple silver bullet plan for how to destroy the comet. It is a plan that America can accomplish alone and with very little complication. At least that's how it's presented. It appears to be a silver bullet right there in a dossier, which he hands to the president, which she sticks in a drawer for no apparent reason. Simply isn't interested. Later, for reasons that have no relation to the plot, she, again on a whim, decides to act on this silver bullet plan. And it just happens. She's able to get the funding, she's able to get these drones manufactured, they're able to launch them, all of it easily. So everything is a go, and then she decides to call it off. Because the capitalist, who I will get to in a minute, tells her that there is gold in their comet, and she just decides to abort the mission. To me, the biggest mistake in this film is this silver bullet plan. Because this is where the satire of climate change falls apart. Because we don't have a silver bullet plan. Climate change is a big, complicated problem, and responding to it is a massive challenge that requires cooperation on huge levels, internationally, within government. It requires probably restructuring our economy. It's not a silver bullet, and it never will be. If you wanted to satirize the political response to climate change, there's a lot there. And you can use this comet thing and this drone strike plan. Show what happens when you take the plan to Congress. Show it getting stuck in committees. Show people arguing that they want things built in their district, that they are worried about certain jobs, that they need these offsets and that offsets, and going in for the pork, and, debating stupid little niggly bits until this thing gets death by 1,000 paper cuts. Because that's what happens to emissions bills and the like. Show the way capitalism actually impacts politics, the way that people prioritize the economy, which they usually mean shareholders and profits, over, people and over action. You could show how these things get watered down. But glossing all over all of that to make it the choice of one single person saying, I'm going to listen to this guy, even though we have a simple solution that everybody has gotten on board with, completely undercuts the satire. And it shows a lack of understanding or a lack of interest in the why and in the systemic problems that prevent action from happening. So talking about individualizing things over systemic stuff, let's talk about the way capitalism is presented in this film. It is embodied in one tech billionaire. And there is another issue with this guy. The filmmakers employ some really unfortunate autism coding. The way that they present the eccentric billionaire is by using traits that are kind of exaggerations of autistic traits. And neurodivergent traits, like not being comfortable with touch, not looking people in the eye, these sorts of things. And the film presents this guy as someone to laugh at. It's very, very reminiscent of all the late night shows that cannot seem to criticize someone like Donald Trump without making fat jokes or joking about the way that he walks and stands. And the thing about that is that, yes, he is fat. Yes, he does walk in not a traditional fashion. So do lots of other people, and you're equating fat people with him. In this case, you're perpetuating ableism by laughing at people with a neurodivergence. And it was deeply uncomfortable. But that is kind of a footnote. The real problem is that we are presenting capitalism as an individual and not as a system. And yes, billionaires are a problem, but they're not problems as individuals. The fact that we have billionaires is the problem. If we could get rid of them tomorrow and not change the system, it would simply create new billionaires. The third target of this film is the media. And this is where we would expect the film to do better, because the film is media. They have a little more experience with it, right? But I really question the way that it's presented here. So when the president doesn't take the scientists seriously, they go on TV to appeal directly to the public. And there's a bit of sneering about the need for media training, which actually media training is important because the way science communication is extremely important. And these two are not good communicators. But that, again, we can call that a filmmaking choice, bit of a narrative convenience. But I found the sneering at it to be a little why it isn't actually an important thing. These two choose to go on a light entertainment show hosted by two very shallow people who refuse to listen and want to keep everything light. Now, these shows exist, but that's not the entire media. And I really doubt that's the kind of place that you would talk about this. So why make this the target of the satire? I don't know. There are so many things you could satirize about the news media and the way that the news media responds to climate change, the way it frames these narratives. You could have the poor scientists have to share the stage with some idiot who thinks the comet is made of cheese. Because both sides-ism, the need to give disagreements the same amount of weight, is a serious problem in news media. And it is because you do end up with people elevating the most nonsense positions in order to present things as a debate. You could have news about the comet be bumped for a major national protest movement that is important, or a coup in an ally that's strategically important. You could show the producer trying to figure out how to balance things and which to give precedence, right? That there are too many issues, and the way that some of these narratives are supposed to be framed. That's another thing. You could look at the way that it values narrative over accuracy. These are all issues with media that are ripe to be satired. But instead, we just get some shallow people who are more interested in celebrity breakup and who are just like, no, we just want to keep it light. The thing that I think the filmmakers are kind of on the right track is when they present social media as being more concerned with the attractiveness of the scientist than what he's saying. And also that there's a demonizing of the female scientist with a valorizing of the male scientist. They're on the right track there, although it's really reductive and, I don't know, it's reductive and there's so much more that could be done that isn't, because they're trying to satirize broadly and not deeply. There's a lack of the why, again. Why are these things happening? Not just the news is kind of light, but why? Why is the news not treating things seriously? The final target is the general public, us. The film kind of presents most people as kind of indifferent and not really paying attention, focused on what the media is telling them. There's a section where Jennifer Lawrence yells at some of them and they go have a riot, but there's no understanding why people might protest or get upset. There's just, she yells at them into a riot. And when the scientists get a pop star to sing a song, a bunch of people go along with it. But mostly the general public are just a cheering section. We also see there is a group here meant to represent the disaffected youth, led by Timothée Chalamet, and they kind of look to me like they walked out of Reality Bites. This is the disaffected youth I remember from my youth, not the compassionate, committed, passionate, sometimes to a fault, Gen Zs that I see. Perhaps I see a different side of the youth than the filmmakers do, but I didn't recognize today's young people in these people. And I think you need to be clear. And it all comes back to, if you're going to satirize, you need to understand. If you want to understand why young people today don't seem to be taking action on climate change, I think you've got to consider perhaps information overload and compassion fatigue. Because as I have said, climate change is a big, big issue. Changing it is going to be complex and difficult. And not only is it a big issue, there's a number of other big issues. And right now, the way that the media works, the way that the discourse works, is we're exposed to all of it. Especially the young people who are digital natives who grew up in this world with all of this information pouring at them. And it becomes too much, and action becomes difficult, not because you don't want to act, but because you don't know which of these things do I act on. How do I do anything that makes a difference to any of this? Those who do usually pick one thing and focus on that, which is how you get, Greta Thunberg or the Parkland kids who are no longer kids, is people pick one issue and focus on that. Because trying to address everything just burns you out. And then you might look like these disaffected kids who are, acting like they walked out of Reality Bites. Because they've burned out all their care trying to care about everything. And that is something that the film is not interested in. It is just, why aren't people acting? Aside from the informational overload issue and the compassion fatigue issue, we do see that people do want to act. A lot of people really do want to act and make a difference. They want to act on climate change. But again, it's difficult to know how. And so people will sometimes jump on a narrative that seems to work and lose a bit of nuance. So one example is the straw ban thing. It's a useful step to reduce plastic, really is. But a But some disabled people need straws. And so an outright ban was always going to be a problem. And on top of that, how much difference does banning straws actually make in terms of the overall, plastic overuse? Yes, we still need to take steps even if they are a drop in the ocean, but if we go all in on one thing as if it is going to be the thing that solves the issue, and it's clear that it's not the thing, it is just a thing, and a thing that is imperfect and needs nuance, that again can lead to people burning out. And again, that is a thing you could satirize. You could look at the way that we jump on narratives and lack nuance, and then get discouraged when we realize that it's more complicated than that. There are a lot of absurdities in how that straw ban thing played out, and how a lot of those kinds of things play out. That is something you could satirize, the difficulty of wanting to act and not being able to. I don't know how exactly you do that with the comet thing, but, again, there is something there that goes into the why of action on climate change doesn't happen. And while there are a lot of people in that would like to act, don't know how to do it well camp, there are also people that we see not acting and actively, saying, arguing against it. And in this film, again, we go back to this Meryl Streep president character. We see her holding rallies, telling people not to look up once the comet is visible. This is where we get the title for the film, Don't Look Up. This is really confused in terms of the narrative, because this president isn't just denying that the comet is there. She's saying they're going to use it for mining. So, we see people who say they're for the jobs the comet will bring. That is pretty clever, actually. But it doesn't match up with the let's not look at the sky thing. Because the let's not look at the sky thing, the don't look up, is also presenting these people purely as stupid. And that is something that we need to address. Saying that people are doing this because they're too stupid to look up. They're too stupid to acknowledge the science. So we've come to the don't look up of it all. And I think the best way to look at this, what this felt like to me, was if we go away from climate change and think of a different comet that we're in the midst of being struck by, COVID. What it felt like to me, I think if we put it in terms of COVID, is a bit like when in response to new variants and new lockdowns and all that some people just angrily tweet, just get vaccinated. And I do understand the sentiment, but that just is covering a lot, because it's making a sort of assumption that everybody who isn't vaccinated is like one of these people. The world isn't made up of the vaccinated and the anti-vax. There are people who would love to get vaccinated, but there are reasons why they can't. Like needing to take time off work, like supply chain issues. Personally, right now, I would love to get my booster. It's not my age group's turn to make our appointments to get our booster. That's supply chain issues, that's larger issues, and there's nothing I can do to make that happen. And that's if we're just talking about the Western world. Variants are going to come out of places where getting vaccines is hard because the infrastructure doesn't exist. Places that were colonized and who have had their resources stripped do not have good healthcare infrastructure. Without the healthcare infrastructure and even the infrastructure, if you don't have roads to take the vaccine to places with electricity to keep it cool, etc., 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 it becomes harder and harder to get people vaccinated. And, like, that sucks. It does. But that is a real thing that, you know, why there is a gap between the vaccinated and the anti-vax. And if I saw, like, a tired, angry doctor who's been working their butt off tweeting, just get vaccinated, I am not going to, well, actually, that's not going to be helpful for that doctor. But if Netflix made a film about it, I am going to, well, actually, them. I kind of am right now. Because if you're contributing to the discourse, especially if you have a platform, you need to remember that nuance is a thing. Ideally, we'd all remember that nuance is a thing, but we also have some compassion that sometimes when you're frustrated, you're going to forget the nuance. If you're making a film, you're supposed to remember it. And speaking of nuance, even the most Karen Von anti-vax and her husband, Mr. Gates, is putting a chip in us. There is a reason, there is a whole history as to why those people don't trust science and don't trust expertise. It's not as simple as they're stupid. It's not as simple as they just choose not to. There's a lot of factors that went into that. And no, I'm not expecting Don't Look Up to be some kind of documentary that goes into all the reasons why people don't trust science and why the erosion of expertise and trust in expertise has become such a thing. But if you're going to satirize that, I think you need to do it intelligently. If you're going to have a crowd of people chanting who represent these people, they're not chanting Don't Look Up. They would be chanting, let it come. And I know that that is a whole lot darker. But I actually think if you were going to commit to satirizing climate change, that's where you go. There are people whose response is, the world is going to end, let it happen. I think, especially if we look at COVID, there are people whose response is, let it happen. And yes, there would probably be people who lined up behind a strongman and thought that there would be some kind of last-minute save, who would think that there would be the kind who thought that a tech billionaire would invent something at the last minute. I think especially if you're going to look at the way the discourse works in America, I think you have to look at the people who aren't acting to save the world because they expect it to end. Anyway, on that depressing point, and talking about people who embrace the end of the world, Dr. Strangelove. I think that's one film that people have compared this film to, and I think when you look at Dr. Strangelove, the satire is extremely contained, and the plot is extremely, it's very carefully plotted. The way that Dr. Strangelove was made is Kubrick took a legitimate spy novel, action thriller one, and just changed things slightly. So the plot was there and the understanding of the situation was there. He just tweaked things slightly. Just changed the personalities and looked at things through a slightly different lens to show the absurdity of the reality. It wasn't scattershot. It wasn't like the presidents just decide to act or not act on a whim. And this film could have done something similar. As I said, we could have had a focus on looking at why climate change bills go to the legislature, the Congress, whatever, to die. We could have looked at why narratives in the media about climate change are such an utter clusterfuck. We could have looked at why people are overloaded with information and not getting important information and losing the will to act. Any of those things, or some combination of all of them, could have been done. This was an opportunity to do something. But what the filmmakers did, if we go back to their thesis, people are not acting on climate change. And my question, why are people not acting on climate change? What does the film think is the why? The film thinks the why is personal choice. That's what it's presenting. That people could act and don't. And my thing is that don't is a world. There is a whole world of questions within that don't. And we need to open that up. We need to look at that don't. And you could have done that, but they didn't. And I think it comes from a very neoliberal, individualistic philosophy of looking at everything through personal choice. And I don't think that that accurately reflects human society. I'm not saying personal choice doesn't matter, but personal choice is always within a framework of society, of systems of belief, of institutions, of infrastructure. All of that contributes to and limits personal choice. It is not all about one person saying yes or no. And yes, often when we put something in a story, we have to somewhat individualize things and we can't really look at the whole system. But satire is one medium that does give us a better opportunity to critique a system rather than placing everything in individual choices. Especially if you're going to commit to a dark comedy. And I think there was the opportunity for that here, and I think they missed it. Honestly, I've rarely been this annoyed by a film whose basic message I agreed with, that we are not acting on climate change. I felt kind of pandered to. I felt like it was inviting me to feel smug about the fact that I do take it seriously and I do take actions. And was being invited to laugh at people who don't. And that was kind of uncomfortable. When I thought about it later and looking at some tweets, there is a bit of a different narrative that I do see that I can understand why some people would enjoy this film. I think to some who would see themselves in these scientists who are doing this work, either as scientists or as advocates, I think that there is something about this that it would be cathartic in just, why aren't people acting? I could see that would be cathartic and validating. And I wouldn't want to take that away from anyone. The nuances of science aren't my thing. I don't know about, measuring polar or ice cap melt or anything like that. That is not my field. And so I'm not going to see the nuances in that. And I'm just going to take your knowledge of that, right? And maybe likewise, you don't know that you're not that interested in the nuance of satire or filmmaking, right? And so maybe you're not so interested in whether this is a good film or not, but in whether you enjoy it and whether it gives you that catharsis of seeing yourself. Totally valid. Totally valid. Like I said, if I saw a doctor just going, why isn't everybody vaccinated? I'm not going to, well, actually, that person. If I saw a powerful Hollywood filmmaker doing it, I would say, hold on a second. There's a whole lot of nuance. And when we talk about whether this film contributes to the discourse, then we have to put aside the feeling validated thing. That I'm glad that you have that. But if the purpose of this film is to convince people to care about climate change, to act on climate change, I think the lack of nuance gets in the way of that. I think making it all about personal choice and the whims of a politician and not about how we approach a systemic issue that needs systemic change, I think that doesn't help the discourse. I think this is reductive. I think this is presenting a straw man argument. The people it's presenting as choosing not to act are being presented as the straw man version of that, to laugh at. And that's not going to make the people who watch this film and then find themselves sitting across the dinner table at Thanksgiving with somebody who doesn't recognize that climate change is a thing we need to act on. Is this film going to give them the tools to have that conversation? No. It might make them see that person even more reductively. And this film, if I was a climate change denier, which again, I am not, this is not going to change my mind. This is going to make me feel like the people who are trying to convince me of their argument don't respect me. And so it just contributes to a further, deepens divisions, right? There is a saying about comedy that it is supposed to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. I do think this film did some comforting of the afflicted. I think some hard-working scientists got to see themselves. I don't think this film afflicted the comfortable. And the reason I say that is because if you put a different person in the role of the president, the entire film collapses. The problem would be solved, the movie would be over, and it would be Armageddon. The Michael Bay film, not the end of the world. If you put someone different in the role of the capitalist, again, the film is over. What is the film actually saying if the entire critique is gone with the change of one character? So those were my thoughts on Don't Look Up. Just not a very good film, not a very good satire. But I don't actually like talking about things that I don't like, and I don't really want to end this on a negative note. I know some people really enjoyed the last scene, not the end credit, that was bad, but the scene where people are together as the world ends. And on that note, I would like to recommend a much, much better film. Yeah, a different end of the world film. One that doesn't talk about climate change, but I think kind of... Anyway, it's called Last Night. It was made in 1998 by Don McKellar. I've made another video about it before. With the height of the pandemic, it was giving me comfort. But it is a film that stars Don McKellar, the writer, and Sandra Oh. It is my favorite performance of hers. And it is the end of the world, although we are never told why. And it is simply the story of a group of people trying to make meaning out of their last 6 hours on Earth. And I think that while it is also a tragic ending, I think it does a much better job of what this film tries to do in the last few minutes to make you think about the value of the world and life and connecting to others. And so if you want to watch a movie about the end of the world that makes you feel something that makes you moved to care about the world, leave Don't Look Up behind and go watch Last Night. Last Night, made in 1998 by Don McKellar, Canadian film. The most Canadian apocalypse film ever. Anyway, thank you for hearing me out, especially if you actually liked the film and you still listened generously. I appreciate it. If I haven't convinced you not to like the film, that's fine. That wasn't really my goal. I hope I've convinced you that we need to have a deeper conversation about the systemic changes to make this world better, including to make it not end quite so soon. I mean, it's going to end sometime, but maybe we can. Maybe we can make the human race not destroy the planet in a few generations. And yeah, fingers crossed.
Never underestimate your audience. They're generally sensitive, intelligent people who respond positively to quality entertainment.